I'm now speaking with 6th District City Councilman Glynn Hines, who's up for re-election. Glynn, if I recall correctly, you had more hair when you began this whole process, and I guess to avoid having it go gray, you shaved it off. Why do you want to do this, stay in City Council?
I think it's critically important that in the community we have representation, someone who can go and represent, in this case, the people of the 6th District, who has the best interests of the community in mind. When I wake up in the morning, yes, my hair is gone, it was gray, but I'm real concerned and I'm real committed to the citizens of the 6th District. The citizens of the community as a whole, but particularly the district I represent, because it's been, I would say, benign neglect for many years, and I think we need to have somebody at the table who's not afraid to speak their mind. And I grew up underneath the shadows of John Knuckles, who was the very first African-American city councilman, and I got my hair cut when I had hair at 9 years old, and I listened to them talk about having the very first, because you're saying about a historical perspective, the very first African-American elected to city council in 1959 to the city council, and the community was excited. And his role then, and there's only been 5 African Americans elected to the city council over all those years since 1959 to today, and I think it's important to represent the people's best interests.
All right, now, have you always had an activist inkling inside, and if so, did your father or mother have anything to do with that?
My father was a precinct committeeman, a ward chairman under John Knuckles. So when the community got together, and again, I like your perspective and looking at it historically, because a lot of times people they don't know the history of Fort Wayne, and they don't know, particularly in my case, many voters don't vote, and they don't understand at one time in Fort Wayne, 1959 as an example, there were no black elected officials. So my father was very active, and he'd read the paper, and he would debate with my mother or anybody about circumstances, particularly in the political arena. And he only had an 8th grade education. But he understood the importance of utilizing your right to vote, finding the right person, put them in the office. If they don't do right, get them out of the office. But he had a passion for politics, and it kind of wore off on all the kids, but particularly me, in that I ended up going to Manchester College, majoring in history and communications, and I was a history teacher for 3 years right out of Manchester College. So I kind of have been locked in to the political process and very opinionated from a Democratic perspective. I've been my lifelong Democrat.
All right, when you mentioned that the idea of voting, there are a lot of intellectuals around here, in Fort Wayne especially, that says that their vote doesn't count. It doesn't make any difference, so therefore they don't vote. What do you say to them?
If you don't vote, your vote don't count, because you didn't exercise your right to vote. I think what you have to do is properly vet the candidates, and whether it be for 6th District or whether it be for mayor or at large, particularly because there's so many people running, you got to understand which of those people, like if there's 3 people at large that you can vote for, which of the 3 best represents your interests. So you got to ask them a lot of questions. That's why I like your show. You get a chance to give the candidates a chance to share what their passions are. So I think the person who does not vote, first of all, you eliminate your right to complain or to criticize because you didn't exercise that right. And I think secondly, those people that vote straight party sometimes are just the same delusion. Because I heard you talk about being a Republican, being a Democrat, now independent. And I think that's probably a lot of the people that don't vote. A lot of them are kind of independent because they're not loyal to any party, and they want to see the person who's going to best represent them. And I don't have a problem with that personally. I think that you should look at each individual and see, is that person going to put forward a platform, a position that supports my best interest, and in this case, the Southeast Quadrant of Fort Wayne.
I do have questions about the Southeast, but you said something else again there, that, okay, it's important to vote, but I've noticed that a lot of people feel hopeless, They feel like nobody is listening to them, and in many instances, they either are afraid or just unwilling to speak to authority figures, especially in light of, the Selma thing here happened, recently, and they know what people fought for, but they can't connect it from then till now.
Yeah, and see, the problem is, I'm glad you used the analogy with Selma, because remember, Selma wasn't a lot of people. There was a lot of people, but you think about the masses were sitting back saying, oh, why are they marching? Masses. The masses were saying, ooh, look at them getting beat, getting dogs biting them, getting sprayed with water hoses. Oh, I would never do that. I wouldn't get out there. So there was a small people that protested for that right to vote. And then there were those who, after they got the right to vote, some of them voted. And then even to this day, what was the turnout? 12% in the last primary. So you're talking 88% of the people, black, white, yellow, everything, don't vote. So there's a mass of people that just don't exercise that right to vote because, and I understand in a way, at the national level, you see all this bickering. You got the first African American president, and they treat him like a stepchild. They're going to try to supersede his powers because they don't respect that individual, and it's making everybody in America say, wait a minute, we voted for him. And then here's the Congress, and they wait to the 11th hour to come up with solutions that impact all the Americans. It's like, how can you be that insane? And they watch it at a national perspective and say, wow. Locally, I get frustrated in dealing with a supermajority of Republicans on council who don't seem to have like the working class people's best interests. And that's why they got rid of collective bargaining, because many of those are trust fund babies. Many of those council members, they have inheritance and they get a check every month, whether they go to work or not, because their daddy's name was, or their granddaddy's name was. And so they don't have, as you were saying, the best interest. So the citizens sitting there and say, wait a minute, I got all these men sitting downtown making these decisions, and big businesses are profiting. And then the average person is saying, well, what about us? And that's why I can understand why they're frustrated and looking at the process and maybe saying. What I challenge that, though, is as long as you don't do anything, it'll stay the same. As long as you don't either get involved, either run for office or support people in office who have your best interests in mind, then things are not going to get better. So I think you have to, and that's where my activism comes in. I think you have to get involved. You got to try like hell to make a change. You got to get a group of people who think like you to get involved and to challenge the status quo so that maybe the changes will occur that you need to see occur.
As you look back over the past years, what was the hardest thing for you to get accomplished in the 6th District that you got accomplished that people don't really realize and give you credit for?
Yeah, I think just about everything I got done was hard as hell. Even starting back, when Graham Richards in 1999 asked me to help him become mayor, I said no. I said, I'm going to run for city council and help the people of the 6th District. He says, well, what is it that you want me to do that would get you to help me get elected? I said, you got to do something about Southtown. Because Southtown was blighted. It was horrible. And I said, we got to do something about that. He said, okay, I'll do that. So that was our ticket. In 1999, we ran on that. And of course, in 2000, we started. Now, I want to give you a historical perspective. In 2000, when we got in office, is when we started working on Southtown. We didn't gain control of it and demolish it, condemn it, eminent domain it until 2006. So that was a 6-year window where people were looking at you saying, hey, Glenn, you said you was going to do something about this rat trap out here known as Southtown. I'm like, hey, we're working on it. So we got that. So I got a little credit, and then the mayor was bright enough to include, Graham Richards that is, to include the Public Safety Academy, which is now Ivy Tech South, in that whole package. He was smart enough to put a CREED legislation, Community Revitalization Economic District, so that the taxes come back into that area. So that was probably number one. Most recently, we just did the McMillan Park renovations, and it was planned to demolish it and not resurrect it, as I call it. And I had to fight to get the first $2 million out of legacy that was spent on McMillan. And my biggest disappointment is that people don't go there. To this day, you have a lot of people from the community that don't go in there. And I go in there just about every day. And on Saturdays, Speece has tournaments. And Metropolitan Football, they have a basketball league over there. So there's a lot of traffic from people outside the community, but a lot of people right there within the community don't even go in the building and see that there's an exercise walking track, that there's a soccer field indoor. They have pickleball. They have one of the only indoor playgrounds for kids in that facility, and then a state-of-the-art gymnasium that rivals Speece. For those that want to go out there and pay $10, $15, you can pay $1 to come in your neighborhood and utilize a facility that's just as good as that. And I don't think people appreciate what it took to get to there. Even to this day, in the Renaissance, which originally was a Hannah Creighton development, and then it became Synergy, and now we know it as Renaissance. And at the time when we started that, Greater Progressive Baptist Church and Reverend Tournay Jordan, we started a CDC, and we built those first houses for $125,000, $35,000, and everybody laughed and said, nobody's going to buy a house over there where the tire fire used to be for that amount. You're crazy. All those houses are purchased. The Phoenix Manor, which is a senior citizen center over there, is up to about 85% occupancy. And then all the houses that have been built, about $40 million of investment in infrastructure, those houses are all sold or leased up. And then, of course, what was going to be a soccer field, the Urban League, Pontiac Library, Kenai facility, I call it the Urban League campus, and that was going to be a soccer field, that was done. So I mentioned those things because people kind of take them for granted, I think. They don't understand how many years it took in the planning, organizing, implementing, monitoring, and then making sure that the product that's there was a product that people wanted. In the last 66 homes, 15-year rental to purchase. In 15 years, they can purchase it with 60% equity. So that's a long-term strategy. People, oh, we don't need that product. Yes, you do, because people are renting. People are renting this building. People are renting. But this way, you rent, and whoever's in that house the 15th year, they have the 60% equity accrual. So I think those are some of the things that, I don't have enough time on the show to explain all of them, but those are some of the highlights of stuff that has occurred, and it did not happen overnight. It was long-term planning, cooperation with the mayor and some county officials, some state legislators and senators and stuff like that, but we brought it to fruition, and I'm rather proud of it, and it's part of my legacy for the 16 years that I've been on council. But I think that's probably some of the things in your question, what have I done that I don't think people really truly appreciate.
What's on the burners that they can expect to be coming in your next term?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I just had a meeting the other day with Prophet Cedric Walker, and he has a thing called Joshua's Hand. And if I could draw a canvas, and the canvas was blank, and I told you that we were going to put in housing, some commercial development, and it would look like Renaissance. So people would say, oh, okay. But what they're going to do at the old McMillan Park Apartments on McKinney, we tore all those houses out, and it's about 23 acres of just green space. And there is a development coming, it's starting this year, for housing, for commercial development along McKinney and Anthony. And I think that will be the next big thing that's going to happen starting this year for the next 4 years.
Now, what's going up there?
It's Joshua's Hand is the CHODA, or the not-for-profit, out of the church. And they're putting in their housing units geared at particularly with women with children. And part of the component of that is they will also get training for like a CNA license. They can go and get CNC. They can go and apply to the Urban League's new job placement. So we're going to try to have not just the housing component, but also the educational component that goes along with it, so people can move up in social status as far as jobs. So there's a component, social services side of it, and Kenai is going to projected to put daycare there. So a lady could go to work and have their child right there on the site. So when they come home, they go by, they pick the child up and go home. That's phase one. But there's 5 phases to this whole development. But the first phase would be that. and then there's additional phases coming up in the future over the next 5 years, just like we did at Renaissance.
You know, when you sit back and look at what's been happening in the past year here in Fort Wayne, there's been a lot of effort by the city to go to Iowa and go all over the universe to gather ideas and, you know, to bring back to Fort Wayne, to make Fort Wayne better in some way. And also downtown right now is an effort to make the environment more inclusive. Now, when you do that, you know, okay, right now we're hugging the different ethnic groups, the short people, the gays, every fringe group there is in the world, we're hugging them, loving them. But it seems like that, number one, if there's an effort to make the environment more inclusive, it means that once upon a time, it was exclusive.
Right.
And those communities that were excluded were the blacks and the Indians. Now, I personally experienced that. I used to be part of a multicultural council out at IPFW, and I'm in there enthused. And I'm talking about the Indians and the blacks and everything. Nobody wants to hear this. So I'm seeing that it seems as though the whole attitude is, yes, we want to hug everybody new. But the old problems, I guess what I'm getting to is, if you create a program of inclusiveness and you exclude the issues of Indians and blacks, the program has to fail because it has a faulty foundation.
Right.
I mean, that's me.
Yeah, and what I would say is that, and I know what you're saying in terms of a lot of the focuses, and part of it is Catholic social services have brought in a lot of Burmese people by natural migration. You have a lot of Latino populations coming into the community, and for whatever reason, they have been steered. Back in the old redlining days, I'd use a term, and I use it today because that's what it is. They're steering all of those populations into the southeast quadrant. So there are pressures to provide services for all these groups in this area. And the thing that I like right now, potential-wise, there are dollars available through the legacy, and now a lot of these foundations are saying that we need to do something. If you watch city council lately, a lot of the other council members are saying we need to focus on economic development, commercial development, retail development, housing development in the southeast quadrant. And I agree, I've been saying that for the last 16 years. So I think what you got to do is both. You got to be able to say to those who want to develop the riverfront, those who wanted to put a new ball diamond downtown, those who wanted to expand the convention center, those who wanted to take the library system and expand it, those were good things. But I think what you're saying is right on point. We need to also, though, not neglect, those Native Americans and those African Americans who have been here for eons. And I always tell the story, talking about history, and I was looking up stuff, and the old G.C. Murphy's, which is now where the Wells Fargo building is on the corner, was originally owned by an African American. Owned that property, owned the land over the years. And then, of course, it was exchanged hands, and eventually became G.C. Murphy's. And then, of course, it became the bank. But it's just amazing how this community, has had impacts, like you're saying, going back to the Three Rivers and, the Miami and the relationship between blacks and Native Americans for years. And then the settlers come in, and then George Washington, who before he was president and general, he was a surveyor. And he came out to this area all the way out to the Three Rivers, and he surveyed the land. That's why we have an Allen County in Indiana and Allen County in Ohio, going all the way out to Pennsylvania and to the East Coast. That was George Washington, the surveyor, who came through and surveyed the land. So there's been a lot of changes in our community, and I think the appreciation, I'm glad you took the initiative to have all candidates running come and share their perspective, because if you have that greater perspective in mind, then when you talk about doing a housing development on McKinney Street or doing commercial development or retail development, it says that we need to make sure that we don't ignore the least of these or those individuals, whether they be new immigrants or long-standing residents in this community when we provide services.
Okay, last question here. What do you want people to know about you and what you're doing here in the 6th District that they have no clue?
I think the most important thing that, in my background, obviously, I worked at the bank, and I worked at Xerox. I retired from Xerox, but I worked at the bank. I have a banking background. I have a marketing background. And I think the thing that I do, and I don't jump in front of the camera every time something occurs development-wise, the thing that I do is I'm a real good strategist, planner, organizer, implementer, monitor of progress. So I don't necessarily need a lot of FaceTime with the camera, but doggone it, I really look forward to getting in the room with those individuals that got the deep pockets, and when they talk about why, like when we had to talk about Southtown, when we talk about the tire fire area initiatives, when they wanted to put a soccer field with it on that area, which is now the Urban League and the Canine and the Public Library, Pine Library, is that you got to be able to sit at the table and to share with them your perspective, which emanates from, and I stand on the shoulders of those great men like your brother that came before me, the Cleas and Edmonds and Archie Lundsey, Charles Redd, and of course the very first John Knuckles. I'm the 5th. And I'm like, I got to think through what more can I do? And I think that my strategy, my strength is in my strategy, finding resources and making things happen. And I try to do it overnight, of course, but I realized when they built the temples, they didn't do it overnight. It took hundreds of years to build the temples. And in Fort Wayne, with this Tea Party, right-wing conservative mentality, whenever it comes to spending money in our neighborhoods, you got to fight through that. And you got to find ways to strategize, and even with people that have far right thinking, like Tom Smith and Russ Yell, but still be able to get the Maple Crest extension done so that development can happen over the years with Adams Center and that. And Russ Yell's grandfather actually helped build the new McMillan Lifetime Sports Academy complex, that $1.3 million complex. His grandfather was involved in it. So I got to tap into people like him that have a real sharp pen and don't want to spend money on social programs, and people that, to say, okay, wait a minute now. And here's an idea that really impacts these young people. Dr. Crawford, conservative, don't want to spend money on any social programs, but he's got to understand if you don't spend money today on our children and providing educational and recreational and social alternatives, then you're going to have to deal with them later on in life. And a lot of times these prisons, it costs a lot more to put somebody in prison than to send them to college. And so I think part of what I do, what I continue to do for the next 4 years, is to look at opportunities to make sure that the 6th District is better served, and that we look at all those opportunities and we execute on them.
I got to ask you this here, because you brought up a couple things here. What kind of comments can you say about Cletus's leadership? I got to ask that because I found that legacies die so fast here, among black ones anyway.
Yeah, see, the first thing that I had recommended was that we name some different places after Cletus. But Cletus, see, I grew up, and I'm probably 6 or 7 years younger. So at Central High School, the thing that I remember about Cletus, he was a big, strong, outstanding athlete and very smart. And that was the one thing that I respected about him, that not only was he a superstar athlete, but he was super smart. And he was able to get things done. So when he came on council after Jimmy Steer had passed, and Cletus took his place and, of course, was on council until his untimely death, he was always at the table fighting. If you ever watch or went, I used to go to city council years before I even thought about running, just to see the dynamics. And Cletus, just like myself, just like John Knuckles, just like Charles Ray, it was always a fight. It's always a fight. And Cletus was a big fighter, and he supported the community, and he did, even when his illness struck, he still was fighting, because I used to go to Links, and Archie Lundsey would go by and pick up Cletus and bring Cletus over to Links, and Cletus, Archie Lundsey, and Charles Redd, and some of those guys would sit in that room and strategize on what we could do, to get things done in the community. So his legacy was a doer. He was able to accomplish things in the 10 years that he served on city council. And in the 16 years, I've kind of modeled myself after those 4 men who came before me. What advantages, what strengths did they have, and how can I utilize those strengths that they had in order to accomplish what I need to do for the 6th district.
This is my last point here. You said something else here. You came out of Central High School. Central, once upon a time when I was a kid, each time Central won any kind of a sporting event or whatever the case is, everybody was proud. Central had a real strong reputation and everybody was tied into it. And a lot of people came out of there that are doing great things, but nobody knows this.
I always tell the story that in 1969, which is the year that I graduated, each year Central recognized the most outstanding young man, most outstanding young lady. And in my class, the most outstanding young lady was a young person named Wendy Sanders. You now know her as Dr. Wendy Robinson. She was in my senior class. And the most outstanding young man was myself. And I'm a city councilman. So I think the two of us are 2 good examples of what Central produced. Also in that class was Dr. Larry Bledsoe, who's an internist here, in the community. And a lot of teachers who recently retired were in that class. Willie Jordan and Herb Carr. A lot of those teachers came right out of that class. Joyce Myatt, Vera Scruggs. All those were the class of 69 who went on to college, who became educators or bankers or salesmen or superintendent to the public school. So I think Central, the thing that Central had was a sense of pride. And I was an athlete. The one thing that we never enjoyed doing was losing at anything. And I find when I watch athletes today, it's like they lose and it's no big deal. In Central, when we win, we celebrate it. When Christmas Addicts came into town, I remember Richard Laurie, scored 21 points in the second half of the game, and we beat Christmas Addicts in our gym our junior year. It's like we went down to Marion, we beat Marion, they were ranked number 2 in the state, and Charlie Reese hit a jumper at the buzzer, and we beat them. So there was a lot of pride in Central in athletics, but also Dr. Helen Lee, who was an English teacher at Central, made sure she sharpened our pencils so we could, write real good papers. And when I went to Manchester College and I would write, and they would say, "Oh, you're a good writer." I said, "Dr. Helen Lee was the person who taught me how to do this at Central High School." So a lot of people say about Central what it was. I tell you what it really was. It was an environment of love and appreciation and of pride. And I think that's what has made people like Cletus and myself go into politics, do very well. Dr. Wendy Robinson go into education, become the superintendent.
Do you have any ambitions of being mayor?
None whatsoever. If the Lord allows me to win this election, this is my last 4-year term, and everybody said, "Well, I know, I know 4 more years. I think I'll be able to get the Joshua's property completed over there on McKinney Street. We'll be able to do some more things with the McMillan Community Resource Center, as I like to call it. We'll be able to do some more commercial development, and it's time for me to pass the baton on to you or somebody else who wants to take that baton. But my timeline is this is my last term as 6th District City Councilman. I have no ambitions to run for any other office once this 4-year term is up. I want to enjoy retirement, enjoy my grandkids, and enjoy life.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching.